Welcome back to the Home to Self podcast. I am so excited to be here for another episode to share another beautiful guest with you and powerful work in terms of intuitive healing, understanding pain better in the body, working through pain and different blocks in the body through energy work. So today on the podcast, I've got Courtney Moore, who is an intuitive healer, and I know that you offer a variety of services and healing modalities. So I'm just going to allow you to introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us a little bit more about the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you. Super happy to be here. I started my career as a body worker. I was a massage therapist first. I could tell massage therapy was going to burn out pretty quickly. And so I became an acupuncturist for longevity, really. I wanted to work with the same kind of things, bodies in pain. But when you work with the physical body for long enough, you just become really aware of the subtle bodies too, the energetic and emotional bodies. And that's what happened to me. I was working with a lot of people as an acupuncturist, as a body worker, and I started to develop this deeper knowing about what was going on with them, how their back or shoulder or neck pain related to their relationships or their job or just their sense of happiness in life. And so my career took a little bit of a turn that way, just really exploring how I knew those things, how to cultivate that ability, how to use it really responsibly in a way that's sophisticated and ethical. And that's where I am today. I sort of blend all those tools. I still do acupuncture and hands-on sessions. I have a clinic here in San Francisco. And then I offer remote sessions that are more counseling based, where I do energy readings, I pull tarot card, I do some counseling just to help people talk through whatever energetic, emotional roots might be behind their physical pain.
Hmm. And what is your story in terms of how you got onto this path and really wanted to become a healer yourself? Because I know that, so many people who end up in the healing space have a story that they went through that inspired them to really want to help others. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about your story.
Yeah, that wounded healer archetype, I think, is very alive and well in a lot of us. And I definitely identify with that. I remember I had someone read my astrology chart when I was in massage school, and she said my Chiron and my North Node were a degree apart. And she said that was the mark of the wounded healer. And at the time, I had no idea what that meant. I was pre-med in college. I was a philosophy major, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with that. So I thought maybe I'll do pre-med. I like science too. And I just figured out really quickly that pre-med was going to be about drugs and surgery, and it was going to involve working with the managed healthcare system. And I didn't want that life. I'm not against Western medicine. I think there's a place for it, and it's a gift for a lot of people in a lot of conditions. But that's not the life I wanted. Those aren't the tools that I wanted to use. And so I took time off from college to go to massage school. And that's really what started the journey. I was 20 at the time and really unhappy. I had a lot of eating disorder issues. I had run away from home when I was 15. My mom died when I was 1, and I never really grieved that. It was just the reality I always knew. And so there was never a point I got to really process what it meant not to have a mom. And when I was 20, all of that was coming to a head. Mom, dad, self, all of it was really front and center for me. And so when I took that time off to go to massage school, it was just a really healing experience. And I got to, become a body worker, which means getting a lot of body work, which is so healing, just to be touched so regularly that way and have whatever you're holding in your somatic system sort of brought to the surface again and again and again for you to look at. And while I was there, I saw an acupuncture demonstration, and that's where I thought, maybe acupuncture is the thing. Maybe it's not Western medicine. I'll do medicine, but I'll do this Eastern version, this alternative version. Um, and I was a little impulsive at 20 to jump feet first into Chinese medicine. I'm glad I did it in hindsight, but it's been a rocky journey to where I am today, really finding the value and practical utility of this different skill set I've cultivated.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, with such a diverse background and understanding of so many of the different aspects of healing, it can be hard to kind of bring that all together, especially in a world that, within business, so much of it is like niche down, have a really specific specialty and whatnot. But
Yeah.
also from a different perspective, having such a wider scope and of understanding is also so helpful when dealing with the body from kind of a more holistic perspective.
Yeah.
So,
That's
yeah,
exactly
go
right.
ahead.
In Chinese medicine, we talk a lot about root and branch treatments. And I think that's been one of the things I really explored as I've tried to develop my practice. People come to you because they need a branch treatment. My neck hurts, make it stop hurting. But if you're really going to make a difference in their life, you have to get to the root treatment. Why is it? Is it that their posture's bad? Is it that they're nervous to see different perspectives in their life? Is it because they had a car crash and they're holding on to that trauma and they never worked it out? And so you have to sort of walk this seesaw pattern of addressing the root so consistently that people feel like they're changing, they're seeing results, but addressing the branch so consistently that those results are going to last. You're not just a technician who's going in there to sort of put a band-aid on something, take away the pain for a short term.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The root approach is so powerful too, just because it's not just putting a band-aid on the symptom, and this leads us perfectly into talking a little bit more about pain as a messenger, which I know is something that you talk about a lot. And there's a quote that I have seen before, and I also saw it on your social media feed. So I thought it was really powerful to bring in here. A quote by Rumi that says, "The cure for pain is in the pain."
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very safe to say that we live in a society that teaches us how to numb out of pain and kind of views pain as this bad thing that needs to be kind of, you know, I don't know, numbed out, and you need to escape from it through either pharmaceuticals or social media or food or any other vice. And I know that you have a different perspective on it and a more maybe helpful approach to pain. So, can you explain how physical and emotional pain might serve as messengers from the body?
Yeah, it really is my favorite thing to talk about because we absolutely live in this culture that wants us to numb it, freeze it, run away from it, cut it out, just get rid of it. Like pain is a problem. It is purely a problem. We have to solve the problem and then everything will be better. But I love the idea that when something's amiss in your life, your soul sends pebbles and then rocks and then boulders. And to me, that's what the pain is. And so it might start as a more subtle pain, a more transient pain, but if you don't listen to it, it really builds into those rocks and those boulders. You really don't want boulders. The boulders are the cancer diagnoses. The boulders are the really complex chronic conditions that takes years to unwind and really heal from. So to me, if we can cut that off at the pass by really listening to these earlier messages of physical sensations from the body or experiences of anxiety, depression, that sort of like inform us that something's not right. And instead of simply trying to right the ship, we ask why. Why are things not right? Why is my body yelling at me right now? The example I often give is that if you put your hand on a hot stove, you wouldn't, you would want to learn that the stove is hot and that's why you don't put your hand there. You wouldn't want to just take your hand away and not come away with a lesson because then you're just going to put your hand on the hot stove again and again and keep burning yourself. And so I think of physical pain that way. And I see people who have these chronic, neck pains, headaches, low back pains, and they do that. They put their hand on the hot stove of maybe relationships that don't work for them, or self-talk that's really damaging, or being committed to a job that makes them so unhappy. And as long as they can take that pain away consistently, they never change the thing that their soul is yelling them about. Soul, mind, deeper knowing, higher knowing. We can talk about that in a lot of ways, but there's some part of you that's dissatisfied with some part of your life. And to me, the body, I think a lot of us think of the body as like a meat suit, like it's just this thing to get us from point A to point B. And to me, the body is really an expression of the self. And the Chinese meridians map that out. The Indian chakra system maps that out. But there's ways we can understand these physical locations in our body as being aligned with or correlating with parts of our spiritual emotional experience. And I use those maps a lot when I'm trying to understand the root of some of these physical pains. So an example would be the liver channel ends in the breasts. And a lot of women with breast cancer, I find, have a lot of repressed anger. They're very resentful at people in their life, at positions they've been put in, at responsibilities they've taken on, even though they didn't maybe really want to take them on. And that repressed anger builds and builds and builds in them and in their liver channel until it manifests physically somewhere along that channel. I think you can also think of things metaphorically just in sort of like what these body parts do for us and how we might be over functioning. So I have a lot of people with shoulder pain, and pretty much across the board, there are people who've taken on so much responsibility and feel so much pressure to uphold that responsibility and like hold the world up for everyone around them, right? They're the linchpin in their team at work. They're the mom who has 3 kids and gets them all to all the practices with clean clothes and lunches all the time. And that sits in your shoulders, that really is the weight of the world on your shoulders. And again, we can use some needles, we can use some acupuncture to make the shoulders feel better for a second. But if that person doesn't change their relationship to responsibility, that pattern is going to keep showing up.
Yeah. And potentially get worse, right? Until we really start to pay attention. It's like it's so easy to cultivate this like hatred towards the body, especially if the body has caused us a lot of pain and discomfort.
Yeah.
And I see this a lot with women, as there's such an expectation for the body to be a certain way and look a certain way. And yeah, it's a really interesting conversation, and it makes sense that we try to numb out and escape the pain because we've never really been taught how to ask that deeper question and those deeper
Mm-hmm.
questions. So I'm just curious. I mean, you've unpacked it a little bit already, but like, do you have any other advice for how people can start to decode or befriend or just like understand their symptoms a little bit better and their pain?
Well, first, I just want to normalize that it's really scary. It's really scary to go towards the pain. And that's partly cultural, societal. But just on a personal level, it's frightening to enter that journey if you have no context and no support. And so I would actually say before you do that, before you take this brave step into yourself, get the context and support. Make sure you have professionals in your life, therapists, body workers, coaches, friends, family members. It could be a bevy of people to support you, right? But make sure you have that support so that when you dive into yourself and you find things that are difficult or confusing or scary, you don't have to do it alone. You can bounce it off other people. You can bounce it off people who have experience with this sort of journey. And with the context, I would say learn a little bit about this before you just dive in. And there's so many great books. I love Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life. I love the Carolyn Mace books. I love Gabor Mate, When the Body Says No, and Bessel van der Kolk. Why am I blanking on that very
Body
famous
keeps the
book?
score.
Yeah, thank you. So I would start there. I would do a little bit of research about these concepts before you just sit with your pain and maybe you start crying or shaking or feel out of control or overwhelmed with anxiety. That's never the goal, right? You have to establish sort of a baseline safety within yourself and within your body before you're capable of taking some of these journeys. So establish that capacity first. And again, I just want to acknowledge that it is really scary and really commend anyone who wants to try to do this. It's really worthwhile and it's really difficult. So make it easier for yourself by getting some support. And then once you get in there, and this is a big first step of the journey for a lot of people, have so much compassion for yourself. The goal isn't to find these aspects of self and then judge them or feel ashamed of them or reject them. The goal is to bring awareness and treat these parts of self as information. This is just information about you and your journey, relationships you've had, messages you've been given. There's no problems. I'm a big fan of internal family systems, parts work. And the big book there is No Bad Parts. And the title says it all. You have all these parts in you. You have the parts that feel ashamed or conflicted or guilty or angry. You have all of them in you. You're a human being. We all have all these parts, but none of them are bad. They're all there for a good reason. And that's it. They're all there for a good reason. We want to explore the reason. We want to understand why your sort of ego structure has been constructed this way. And then we can start to do the real healing work of accepting those parts, integrating those parts, letting other parts that are maybe more desired in this current present time come up to the forefront. But yeah, the point of all that was just to say, have compassion for yourself. Whatever you find in there, whether it's, oh shit, I'm really unhappy in my marriage. It's been 20 years. I thought this was going to be a lifeline situation. That's a terrifying realization for people, right? And people will shy away from that. People will often opt to stay in pain rather than processing that truth. And so have deep compassion for whatever you find and know that you don't have to act on it right away. You can just hold that knowledge. You can just sit with a deeper awareness, with that light of consciousness, and that can be enough for the next phase of your journey, whatever that's going to look like.
And what are some more patterns? You explained a little bit about, like, whether it's breast cancer, or anger with the liver and those connections. But I'm curious to hear, because I'm sure you've seen so many patterns between pain points in the body and what they might correlate with, as some more examples for people, especially something that I've seen a lot, and that was my journey as well, was a lot of digestive gut issues. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like this comes up a lot for women, and
Mm-hmm.
I've learned a lot from myself, but I'm curious, like, what might be a correlation there, and any of the other common ones that you see specifically for women.
There's three things that come up when I think about digestion. The first, and I talk about this even when it comes to physical pain, the first is purely on a material level. We live in a culture where we don't have access to healthy food a lot of the time, or we're feeding ourselves food that doesn't really nourish us. And so we have to look at that first, right? Even as we're simultaneously doing this emotional energetic work, we have to do some kind of cleanse, clear out our pantry, start to eat organic, play with different proteins. There's a lot of things we can do on that level and see how the body responds. I think a lot of women in particular eat a very restricted diet and have really specific ideas about what a healthy diet is that their body might not be on board with, right? Maybe they're eating a vegan diet and that's what their ethical self wants. And their body really wants animal protein. Their body says, that is what I would thrive with. Would you please give me some? I was that for 15 years. I was vegetarian. I am no longer a vegetarian and my body is very, very happy with that. But it was a hard transition for me because of that ethical component. So the actual physical food is step one. That, of course, really relates to the second thing, which is nourishment. In Chinese medicine, the spleen and the stomach are the main digestive organs, and we call those the earth element. And the earth is, the earth nourishes us just on as humans on this planet. The earth is what provides for us. And people with digestive issues, women in particular, often have a complicated relationship to the theme of nourishment. Can they receive nourishment? Do they nourish themselves? Do they constantly nourish others at the expense of themselves? Does nourishment mean treats like sugar instead of real food? That might mean, feel boring or feel tedious. So that's another big thing, is nourishment and your relationship to that. And the third one is, the spleen in Chinese medicine is really like the big, big digestive organ, which is funny because it doesn't have a big place in Western medicine. But the spleen, they say, is like a cow chewing her cud. It deals with rumination and worry. And for a lot of people who aren't digesting well physically, they're not digesting well intellectually or emotionally also. They're taking an idea or a feeling and they're just spinning on it over and over and over again. One of the main ways I treat anxiety is by starting with the spleen. What is it that you're ruminating on and not processing and letting go and releasing to the metal organs, the large intestine and lungs, so they can excrete it for you? So I think those are the big three for digestion for me, is like, what are you actually feeding yourself, your relationship to nourishment, and your relationship to sort of like rumination and letting go. Some of the other ones I see for women, I see a lot of low back pain in my practice. And I see that related to a few different things. One is a sense of, do you feel supported by other people in your life? And I think some somatic therapists do a phenomenal job of really teasing out what would it feel like to be supported. I think a lot of women have no idea. And so it's sort of off the table because they can't even conceptualize it for themselves. And there's a bit of an irony here, although it's part of it. The feminine energy, yin energy in Chinese medicine is receptive. That's like its core nature, is to receive. And I think a lot of women in today's culture are very confused about how to embody the feminine and how to receive in a way that feels good to them, feels like they are respectable, feels like they still have a sense of power. And so feeling supported for the low back. The low back often has to do with money also, and that's a kind of support, right? Financial resources. And so a lot of people I interact with who have low back pain have some sort of major money concerns. They don't feel confident about their ability to generate income, or they don't feel good about their savings, or they always feel like they're going to lose something. Um, Yeah, I think that that's a big one. And the final thing with low back pain, there's a really great book called Healing Back Pain by John Sarno. And he talks about, again, with the repressed anger as a root of back pain. And I have seen some people really work his suggestions in that book and those concepts to get to the other side of back pain. And so it's that same thing of like, well, what is it that you're like sitting on, harboring, tucking away, and not able to really release and express? Yeah, I think those big ones for back pain. Again, I love the Louise Hay book, and she has like a whole compendium of correlations, which I think are a great starting point. I'll just give that caveat because I don't think any book has the solution for everybody. You have to have your own journey with it, but a starting point is really helpful sometimes. My mother died from breast cancer, and I do worry about her own repressed anger. My father died from pancreatic cancer, and that has to do with the sweetness of life and a bitterness related to not really feeling the sweetness of life. And she died when I was 1, and he spent his entire life after that being so bitter that he lost her, which is so tragic and also interesting to see how that manifests in his body. He couldn't have sweetness once he lost her, it was not available to him any longer. So I think Louise talks about all of this in her books. The last one I'll say, because I see this one pretty often too, is joint pain in the hands, so the wrists and fingers. The hands are an extension of the heart. And so that kind of pain is often about making connections. Can you reach out and connect with others? Can you connect? Can you like actually take down the facades and get past the walls, yourself and others, and truly reach someone? And I think in our current society, we're, especially after the pandemic, but we've been going this way for a long time. I think, especially with technological advances, we're so distant from one another. It's hard to connect. We don't even spend that much time in person anymore. And we don't have that many heart to heart conversations. It can be really surface level, really niche. So that's just sort of like a private goal of mine as a person in society, is to foster places where we can connect more. And I think for people with that kind of pain, there's a really clear call to find more of those spaces in your life.
This is so fascinating. I feel like I could just listen to you all day talking about all these different correlations in the body. It's just, I just find it so interesting how the body is so intelligent and how these symptoms, again, are such messengers to show us like where we're still holding on to things that are not good for us or not processing things. Like, um, yeah, for me, like I said, with my gut issues, like that's really was my gateway into the deeper work and the subconscious and energy work and such. But it was so interesting because I went on that exact path that you kind of described of trying to heal myself strictly through food, but through a very restrictive, control, fear-based approach. And my body was giving me every sign that it was not good for me. And yet I was still pushing through because I was operating from this like logical, fear-based perspective, and would have essentially like finally allowed me to break through to the other side and experience healing was, yeah, starting to understand how I was not mentally processing and staying stuck in like these same worry filled like thoughts and beliefs that were just always putting me into a state of fight or flight. And also that contraction that I see a lot. It's just like that fear that I think like that sacral region also really is connected to, right? That like it's just like ultimate fear, like worry and concern and all that. So it's just really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And something you mentioned that I would love to touch on as well towards the end here is that like human connection, right? This is, I think, such a huge topic right now, like you said, especially after the pandemic and just overall in this Western society too, of how independently we are taught to be. And now with working on the computer remotely, it's just it's become unfortunately very normalized to just be in your own bubble a lot. And towards the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned also like the healing aspect of human touch, right? Of connection, of actually like interacting with other and like feeling their energy. And I've experienced this in such a powerful way because over the past 2 years, we've cultivated such a beautiful conscious community here. And just to see the impact that it's had on my life and my healing, I didn't even realize I was missing that. And so I've tried to just explain this from my understanding, but I'd love for you to dive a little bit deeper into like the importance of connection, but especially like human touch, you know? Like I feel like we really need that, and it's some people are so far from that because they're so afraid for that emotional intimacy.
I think that's all absolutely correct. And I want to springboard after something you said, which is you were stuck in the logic, which was very fearful. And I think a lot of us are stuck in our heads, which are very logical and therefore very fearful. I think when you're in the mind, you're running a fear program. The mind has a place, right? It gets us to work on time and it makes us buy groceries. And we need our minds, we need our egos, and also we need our hearts, we need our bodies. And to me, the touch element really helps people get out of their heads. We all live in our heads so much. And it's really hard to get out of it. I've even been hesitant lately to practice meditation practices to my clients, which I'm a huge meditator and a big fan of meditation. But I think if you don't have the right, again, context and support, you go into your mind and then you just spin. You close your eyes and you spend an hour just spinning and being fearful and being harmful to yourself, thinking really harsh thoughts. And so that somatic connection, and especially being touched by another person intelligently, deliberately, that's what moves us from our head into our body. And in our body is where all the wisdom is, all of the kindness is, all of the hope is. That's all in our physical self. So, this can manifest so many ways. Just getting a massage, it can be a great start. I know for myself, again, we're all in our heads. I am on that list. And so I'll find myself sometimes getting a massage and I'm like making my list of what I have to do that night while I'm getting a massage. So for me, it's nice to work with a practitioner who's a little bit more interactive. Some body workers are this, some somatic therapists are this, some acupuncturists or chiropractors, but someone who's sort of going to continue to call you into your body in the act of receiving that touch. I think this can be sexual also. And I just want to mention that I have a couple friends who are really skilled sex therapists. And, I think for a lot of people, sex is one more way to check out. You're in your brain and you're not really connected to what's happening from the neck down. And there's such a potential there for erotic connection to get you back into your body and into yourself, but you have to be so deliberate about it. And so, there's different teachers, different practices, but I think that's a nice way people might actually notice how checked out of their body they are, is like in these moments where you're supposed to be so embodied. Are you really connected to the physical sensations of your existence, or are you thinking about the sensations of your existence? It's a really different experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so powerful to start to go in that direction and really try to inhabit the body again with all of the senses, right? Because like that is being present to what's here and to what's now. And I feel like we miss out on so much of our lives from being in our heads and in our minds and thinking about the future and the past. And also like it is very scary, especially if you've experienced trauma or pain or chronic
Yes.
disease or whatnot. Like it's very
Yes.
scary to want to even dive down with the awareness. And so I totally get that. um, what are some, do you have any like practical tips that people at home could implement just to really slowly start to practice coming down into their bodies on a daily basis?
I think a great starting practice, well, three. I'll give you three great starting practices that are, of course, advanced practices too, if you stick with them long enough. But the on ramp is pretty easy for these three. One is any form of breath work. And especially if you do some sort of guided breath work from a recording on YouTube or a teacher you find online, the breath is really the bridge between the body and the mind. And doing even just 5 minutes every morning of some sort of breath work that will bring you into yourself. As you're focusing on your lungs and that expansion in your core, you will almost necessarily move into your body. So I think breath work is a great start. That'd be top of my list. Related to that, for me, my journey started with yoga. That was really the thing that brought me into my body and started so much of my own deep healing. And ultimately, yoga is a breath practice, right? You can do all the asanas, all the movements. You can treat it like a gym class, but it's when you really drop into the breath, when you're coordinating the breath with the movements, when you're tapping into that prana that starts to invigorate the whole body. That's when you're really doing the practice, right? And really doing the inner work. And so, again, a yoga practice, ideally guided by someone who really understands those principles. I'm guessing most core power yoga teachers aren't focusing on that sense of embodiment and breath in the way you might find from like a hatha teacher or an Iyengar teacher, right? So the type of yoga matters, but I think breathwork and yoga are both really wonderful starting points. Yoga is nice, and I think breathwork too, because for a lot of people, the idea of focusing is really intimidating. And so having a movement associated with the practice gives you something to think about. It's almost like a distraction. I'm going to think about all these weird things I'm doing with my body, and then somehow I'm actually going to end up in my body at the end of it. So I really like that for folks. The third one I will say is maybe the hardest because it lacks that distraction element, which is a Vipassana meditation practice. And Vipassana is a technique where you're scanning the body from head to toe and toe to head and just looking for sensations and usually labeling the sensations you find. So, like, oh, my hands are cold today. Okay, I'm going to move on. Oh, my chest feels really tight. And you don't judge it, you don't change it, you don't panic about it. I think Vipassana can be revolutionary for people with chronic pain because you can say, there's my hip pain. Yep, that's pretty high today. Okay, I'm going to move on. What's my knee doing today? And there's a way you learn to coexist with the sensations of the body. Part of that practice is also labeling the thoughts like, oh, there's my hip. I'm going to my knee. Oh, wait, nope, I'm making my shopping list. I got lost. Let me come back to my knee. And I'll reiterate, there's no wrong way to do this. It's not like you have to attain nirvana in order for meditation to be worthwhile or successful. Spoiler alert, no one ever does, right? It's really the practice that helps you, the practice of tuning into sensation, losing your way, noticing you lost your way, and tuning back into sensation. And I'll say again, this can be a really short practice. 15 or 20 minutes can really change your experience of your body and therefore of your whole life. Eventually, you might want to do something like a meditation retreat where you really have teachers guiding you over multiple days. But I really like those three on ramps for some sort of somatic practice: breath work, intentional yoga, and Vipassana meditation.
Yeah, I love what you said about really it is about the practice, right? Whether it is meditation or yoga or breath work, all these different practices is they're strengthening your mind body connection really and allowing you to drop back into a place of like feeling and being instead of
Mm-hmm.
just like doing and thinking. And that's
Yes.
been honestly the most powerful practice in and of itself that I've ever cultivated. And
Mm-hmm.
it's been really interesting because for so long in my life, and I'm sure so many people can resonate with this, I would get so lost in the world, in my mind, just anywhere other than in my own human experience. And for me, meditation really allowed me to understand what it's like to come back to myself. And part of the theme
Yes.
of this Home to Self podcast is this really, whether it is through yoga or meditation or breath work or what other modality you choose,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there's an act of like your focus and all of your energy being out there or up here versus coming back to like the present moment and your own human experience. And like the body is such a, it's like where this is all happening. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I just
Mm-hmm.
like if there's one thing I wish people knew how to do and understand what that feeling is like coming back. And yeah, I had
Mm-hmm.
this really powerful experience at a music festival a couple years ago where the first night I was just so overwhelmed. There's so much stimulus going on. It was just like it was a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And because of this practice and this understanding, my body was just like, go sit down and like come back to yourself. And so I went like around the corner and sat down in the middle of the chaos and was able to use my meditation practice and kind of these techniques to bring myself back into my own energy. And the stillness that came of it, it's like I felt like my energy was just like and just like settled. And suddenly, like, even though I could hear all the chaos and stimulation around me, like in my own experience, I was just so serene and calm and just safe. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just such a powerful practice to be able to connect the two and know how to come back to yourself, really.
Yeah, and I think such a big part of that is recognizing the self as something that surpasses the anxieties, the critical thoughts, the pain, right? Yourself, your true core essential self is beyond all of that. And it's part of why I love the parts work too. The core tenet of parts work is let's find the self. Let's find the self that's dialoguing or interacting with all these parts, and let's trust that self to really make good decisions, to really, find love. That's the self is love at the end of the day.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And so many these parts can be so loud sometimes, but again, I think cultivating that practice can help you kind of like it just lowers its voice a little bit so that the self with a capital S can actually come through and be listened to and heard. And so
Yes.
such
Yeah.
a beautiful practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So pivoting a little bit, we've talked about a lot of different modalities and practices here that can help with healing and connection. You talk a lot about top down approaches versus bottom up. And I'd love for you to break this down a little bit more for people and explain the difference and when it's appropriate to use one or the other.
Yeah. This top down is really using the brain as our way into the self, the organism. And especially if people are more comfortable with their brains, that's often a good starting point. If you're totally disconnected from your body, starting with body awareness might be too confusing, too foreign. And so, top down techniques include things like meditation, guided visualizations. For me, I use the tarot cards sometimes. They give you an image and an archetype to work with, and your mind can start to interact with that. Yeah, it's just anything that uses the mind as the entry point from the top, from the mind. Bottom up, it starts with the body. And so that's where you get body work and acupuncture. I think of breath work as a bottom up modality method. Um, Reiki energy work, anything that is starting in the body instead. And, we talk about the nervous system a lot these days, especially in the context of any kind of trauma. And the nervous system is the brain, there's your top, but then it's all these nerves that run throughout the entire organism. People talk about the vagus nerve a lot lately. It's a very long nerve that runs through a lot of your viscera. So that's the bottom, is all the nerves. And in the research, we're learning that what's happening in the body to those nerves is actually more important than what's happening in the mind. So you can tell yourself, I'm safe. You can tell yourself everything's fine. But if your body says, no, I am not safe and I need to stay on alert, your brain will never get the message. So often you have to start with the body to create that sense of safety, to calm down that peripheral nervous system, to get that vagus nerve back into a healthy tone before the brain can really start to change, can really accept new ideas or fall into a new rhythm. I think this is where there's a lot of potential for using psychedelics, which are very popular right now. And it's interesting to me, psychedelics blend the top down and bottom up, right? You're taking this substance and having this chemical experience, but you're thinking the whole time. Your brain is processing things differently. And I really feel like sometimes that kick is what you need after you've done the body up work to get all of the top down work into a new groove. And I got that from some ketamine therapists I talked to years ago. They said this work is so good for people who've been in therapy and they've done somatic work. They know their stuff, right? They know their story, they know their hangups, they know what they're trying to heal. They can't get on the other side of it. And to me, that's the real gift of psychedelic therapy. And I say that because I think a lot of people are misusing this therapy right now. They're using it to have these like peak experiences, to like collect insights. I don't think that's the game. I think the game is you do your work for a year or many years beforehand, and then you use this chemical reset to get your whole nervous system into a different way of being. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally know what you're saying and I agree. I feel like it can become another form of escape, right? Escaping the
Yes.
pain, escaping the discomfort. Um, and it works in the moment maybe sometimes, but also like to really integrate the lessons from psychedelics, from such a profound experience, I agree that it's like when you already have this foundation of like understanding yourself to some degree in your body, then it's just like giving you a different perspective to actually like embody that
Yes.
as like wisdom that you have experienced, right? It's like
Yes.
becomes more
Right.
of like a visceral understanding, and that's really
Exactly.
powerful.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think in general, for anyone on a healing journey, you need some top down work and some bottom up work. And I can't tell you in what order or in what balance, but I think that's something everyone should be mindful of as they're navigating their own journey. Do I need more somatic support right now? Does my nervous system need more of a balancing? Or do I need to understand and process? Do I need to really analyze what's going on? We weigh the analysis so heavily in our culture that I'm going to say pretty much everyone needs to do more bottom up work, right? But that's not to say that's all you need to do. The brain still needs to be on board with this process. I, as an acupuncturist, I love working with folks who are also seeing a therapist because it's really fun for me to like dig around in the body and engage the body in these ways and then say, so now go talk to them about that rumination. Like that's really a thing. Go discuss why that, where did that come from? How does that serve you? What is a different pattern you want to cultivate? And then come back and see me. And we're going to use the body again to reset some of these patterns.
Yeah, I love that you shared this, because this has been a thought of mine for a while too. Like I do a lot of um, subconscious work with people, understanding their patterns, understanding childhood and such.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding has always been like, I feel like there's kind of these two camps right now where people are preaching one or the other. And
Mm-hmm.
like you just mentioned, both are so important. We're not just mind and we're not just body. Like there's a reason
Yes,
both of these parts are so important. And yeah, it's like, it's almost to me like if you don't address the body, then you can do all of the mind work you want, but it's not going to fully feel embodied and create those like felt changes in the body. And if you don't address the mind and only address the body, it feels like you're healing patterns, but like you might be recreating them again because you haven't shifted the way that you move through life and your
absolutely.
perspective, right? So
That's so
it's
well
such an
said.
interesting conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, shifting a little bit further into intuition. As an intuitive healer, I'd love to hear your perspective on like how does intuition guide you in your healing practice, and for people who are interested in developing, a stronger connection to their own intuition, what's your perspective on helping them strengthen that and navigate their healing through intuition?
I love intuition. It's been such a guiding compass in my life and in my practice. I define intuition as information you have access to without knowing how or why you have access to it. So
Mm.
the logical mind knows why you have that information, right? You read it in a book or you read a study or someone told you. Intuition just, I had a teacher who said it just pops. It's an awareness that just pops into your being and you have a feeling that it's true. For me, in my room, in my healing room, I often put my hands on someone and I just have a sense. The example I always give is I've worked on multiple people now who had hip pain. And as soon as I touched their hips, I knew it was about their husband. Just instantly. I don't know why, I don't know how, but as soon as I brought it up, they all started weeping and there was a lot going on there. Um, Intuition can take a lot of different forms and can take me in a lot of different directions. I've done several years of clairvoyant training. That's probably the most commonly developed through like a formal setting. And so that's seeing energy as pictures. And I love clairvoyance. It's really fun. It's very creative and yeah, it just helps us understand energy patterns like almost in a new way, in a metaphorical way. Like you might feel that energy pattern internally, but not really be able to put your finger on it and have someone reflect it back to you as this all started for me because my teacher took my pulse and he said, it was after a breakup. He said, your heart feels like the Greek myth of the Furies flying out of their prison. And that was just so apt. It was better than anything anyone could have said about the literal sensation of heartbreak. That was like, yes, that's exactly what I'm experiencing. And ever since that moment, I would take people's pulses and I would just get these pictures that were really accurate, really helpful for what they were navigating, what they were processing. And so these intuitive pictures and these intuitive hits on how pain is related to a different part of their body are the ways that I have used intuition the most. I mentioned I read tarot, and I think the tarot cards are another way to sort of give your intuitive capacities a chance to speak up, right? Take a look at this card. What's the first thing that comes to mind? What associations do you have with this image or this color or this theme? No right or wrong answers. This is part of why so many tarot decks exist, because the different imagery can speak to different people and spark their intuition in different ways. So I think getting a tarot deck is a good starting way to cultivate your intuition. Again, it's like a very grounded way that's especially good for people who need a little bit more of a mental hook that they can hang on. And you can read about the tarot online, but just getting a deck and just letting the intuition speak to you. Do I like this figure or not? Does it feel ominous or opportunistic? Just go with the feelings to begin with. Intuition is all about feeling. The other thing I'll say is I just feel so strongly that we're all very intuitive. It's a part of being human. That sixth sense capacity is something we all have access to. And so you have all been interacting with your intuition on a regular basis. Whether you listen to it or not is a different story. And whether you're using it or not is a different story. And so I would just say to cultivate it, start actively using it. And that might mean before you make a decision that you might normally use intellect for, ask your intuition, I'm not looking at the weather forecast. Do I need warm clothes or cool clothes today? I am going to the grocery store without looking at my list. What are the foods that my body really wants to eat this week? Buy them. See how that feels to you. It becomes just a practice like anything else, a practice of listening to yourself, the information that doesn't necessarily have like a rooted reason for being there, but learning to trust that information anyways, learning to have a relationship with the part of you that's offering up that information.
Yeah, I love what you said too about like it's not whether or not you like are connected to your intuition, but really if you are trusting it, right? I think that for so many,
Yes.
especially women who are very, very intuitive, but again, this isn't something that we are taught from a young age to trust. And so it becomes something that's like, oh yeah, maybe like, my initial reaction or my heart or my gut, like responded in a certain way to this, but instantly the mind and the fear and the logic comes in because we've trained it so much to really be the
Mm-hmm.
decision maker. And so
Yes.
i
Yeah.
love i love those kind of practical ways of just starting to tune into like what feels like it's coming from your intuition, and then slowly starting to trust that and follow that. And I think through taking action on it, and that's how you actually build the trust muscle, right? Because it's like you can
Yes.
see for yourself, oh, every time I've trusted this voice or the pictures I get or what however you receive that information, and it's landed and it's led to a positive outcome, like you start to really trust that. That's how it's been for
Yeah.
me, and it's really
Yeah.
empowering because it's like, oh, I actually know so much more for myself and my
Yes.
path and my body than I thought, and it just empowers you.
Yeah. I think we have endless decisions to make as human beings, and those decisions can be so stressful and cause a lot of anxiety and spinning and indecision and fear. And that's exactly when you reach for your intuition, is when you have to make a decision, and you see yourself paralyzed with the options, really, really not knowing which option is best for you. And I had a teacher once, I love this so much. She said, see if in those moments you can connect to your body and try on the different options, the different decisions you might make, and see if your body feels heavy or light. And I think that's such a great, simple starting point. Do I want to go to the concert or do I want to stay home? Do I want to go to the concert? Where do I feel that? Where do my shoulders feel? Where does my face feel? What does my heart, my stomach, my pelvis? Like, what sensations are there? Okay, I'm going to stay home tonight instead. Oh, how does that feel? What goes on in my body when I make that decision? And again, using the body as a bridge to really understanding the intuition is a really important part of developing that capacity. The body needs to come on board for this journey, right? It's not just the brain, as per our whole conversation. And so include your body as you're developing your intuition, trying to find that truth for yourself and trust it.
Yeah, that's huge because it's also like the body doesn't lie, right? The mind can
Totally.
the mind can warp and twist anything into justification and validation and whatnot, but the body seems to give a pretty honest answer for where you're at, and sometimes we don't want that answer, but yeah, it's a powerful practice to just start to tune in and see what's coming
Yes.
up when you actually try that on. I love that example. Thank you for sharing that. That's really
Yeah.
helpful. And this leads me into energy work, which is, all of this is so connected, but you mentioned tarot readings as well as a way to practice like trusting your intuition and whatnot, and also this practice of tuning into the body and seeing if you feel heavy or light. Like I think this is also deeply connected to energy work and starting to become more aware of the subtle energy body.
Mm.
um, can you share an explanation of energy healing work that's just like simple for people who may not have explored that yet?
The core tenet of energy work for me is that everything is energy. Every body, every physical part of our reality, every thought, every feeling, it's all energy. A relationship is an energy between two different beings. And so energy work means addressing often the body as a culmination of many, many different energies. And energy wants to move, right? Think about atoms vibrating, right? Energy wants to be in motion. And when energy doesn't move, when it's stuck, that's when illness happens. That's when, um, that's just when you feel stuck, right? I'm just thinking about relationships. When the energy of a relationship isn't moving, it feels like a stagnant pond, right? There's no growth, there's no exchange, there's no movement. So energy work is the act, the process of getting that stuck energy to move. Sometimes that involves addressing deficiency. And the image we often use for that is a creek in the summer that's so dried up that the water can't move. It needs more water in order to have movement in that creek bed. So for some people, deficiency is going to be a part of the energy work. I think that's true for a lot of women. I'll just throw that in there. I think women are really depleted often. And also, there's a lot of ways to move energy. So energy work can take a lot of different forms, right? Acupuncture is a form of energy work. We're thinking about energy in the context of these 12 channels of energy. And, we're keeping this simple, so I won't go too deep into that, but we're trying to move energy through the 12 channels. It can be Reiki. Reiki masters use their hands to move energy in different areas of the body. I think some body work can be a type of energy work because, again, everything is energy. And so if you're using your hands to knead a certain area, you're also using your hands to move energy through that area. So ultimately, what we're going for with energy work is just moving whatever energy is stuck.
That's a really great example. Or not example, but definition and example. Are, again, keeping this practical for tips people can take home right away and use, like, is there any form of like energy work that people can do on themselves at home, maybe to release pain or to access more information in the body?
Well, it's interesting because I'll go back to everything's energy. And so those three tools we talked about earlier, the breath work, the yoga, and the meditation, are all forms of energy work. When you are doing that breath work and really deliberately moving prana, chi, into and out of your body, you are doing energy work. When you're doing an asana practice and you're moving your body into all these different shapes, you are moving energy. That is an energy practice. And for that Vipassana meditation, when you're noticing sensation and you continue to scan through the body, just the awareness of that sensation often shifts the sensation. So you're changing the energy, you're doing energy work. So I think those three are still a great starting point. I would say if someone really wants to learn more and wants to dive deeper in, it's pretty easy to get some sort of Reiki training or certification. And Reiki is great because you can do it on yourself. And they even say if you do it on someone else, you're bringing that energy through you. And so you're getting a little treatment every time you offer that to someone else. I do Reiki on myself sometimes. And I think it's a really cool way to cultivate that awareness and also incorporate this new form of self care, energetic self care.
Mm. That's really interesting. I'm glad you connected the dots there, explaining that those practices you mentioned earlier are still a form of energy work. That's really powerful. I don't think I've ever thought of it that way. And yeah, I also assume that, feeling your emotions whenever they arise is also a form of energy work, because emotions
Yes,
are energy in motion, and it's
exactly.
energy that wants to move, right?
Exactly. I use that emotions are energy in motion thing all the time because if you have
Mm-hmm.
that emotion rise up in you and you say, nope, not right now. I don't have time for grief. I'm not interested in anger. I don't have the capacity to really feel joy. Then you stop that wave of energy that's trying to move through you. And that's when it gets stuck in your body. And all these maps are trying to understand where that energy gets stuck, right? Oh, the anger is going to go into the liver channel. Got it. Oh, the sadness is going to go into the lungs. Got it. But that's exactly right. The energy of emotions wants to move very, very much.
So powerful. Yeah, that's so powerful. And it's a simple, not easy way to start to really, help
Yeah,
yourself too, is like let that emotion come out in a healthy way and slowly like allow it to just move through without labeling it or judging it or making it wrong.
that's exactly right. Yes. Yeah. Or even investing too much in like what it means. I
Mm,
think sometimes we think that, like a great grief or sadness must mean we have to like, I don't know, change our relationships because we feel sad. And sometimes just letting the sadness move through us is the only thing that needs to happen. I wish I could say that in a more sophisticated way. I guess what I mean is sometimes we think our emotions are truths, and more often our emotions are information, which isn't necessarily like the capital T truth you want to live your life by.
yeah. Yeah, that's huge. I often think about like, what is the story I'm making this mean, right?
Yes,
Because
thank
that
you.
can
Yes, exactly.
it like perpetuates. It's like there's a feeling and then we give it a meaning that's potentially not even a truth, like you said, and then it just feeds the
Yes,
feeling, and it just like is this cycle that we get caught in. So yeah, can you just feel it without having to make it mean something?
yes. That's so well said. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's huge. This has been such an amazing conversation. I'm so grateful that I got to have you on and connect a little bit more. Before we start to wrap things up, is there anything else that you'd like to share that I haven't asked you about?
You covered my core passions really well. Those are all the things that really drive the work I do. And I really hope people can cultivate this awareness for themselves. It will change your lives, it will change the world, right? Changing the world starts with changing ourselves. And so taking that time to really understand yourself and heal yourself and listen to yourself, that is the most powerful thing you could do for the planet. I truly believe that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So, just a few rapid fire questions that are fun that I ask everyone at the end of each episode. The first one is, what is one of the most important lessons that you've learned along your journey?
I have learned that expectation management is the key to a happy life. I
Hmm.
think early in my life, I let my expectations, especially of other people, but also of myself and of situations I was in, those expectations like set me up for disappointment and resentment and unhappiness. And so I've really learned to be aware of my expectations and whenever possible, cut them down at the knees and be more open to possibility and more open to life doing its thing instead of life matching what I think it needs to look like.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Top three health and wellness practices that you love. You mentioned breath work and yoga, meditation earlier. Are there any other ones that come to mind?
Those are still my big ones. Those are the big three I do for myself, certainly. And I get so much out of them. I have for years and years and years. Um, we talked about food a little bit. I do think food is really the cornerstone of a healthy life. It's less easy to talk about it as a practice, but we feed ourselves multiple times a day. So in a way, it is a practice. So the practice of nourishing yourself with good food is also really important.
Huge.
Yeah.
And then the final question, this podcast is called Home to Self, and I think that has so many different meanings for so many different people. So to you, what does coming home to yourself mean?
That's a really beautiful question. I I definitely do struggle with some of my own parts that feel really worthless and feel a sense of shame. And so for me, when I'm really into the Enneagram. I'm a four in the Enneagram. Those are very classic four traits. The Enneagrams really help me identify some of these parts that aren't necessarily my core self, right? And so for me, being able to observe those patterns arising, and even if just the tiniest brain cell is able to say, wait a minute, that's not you. That's not your core self. That part of you that feels worthless, that part of you that feels hopeless and rejected and always an outsider and you'll never amount to anything. Wait. That's not self. And to me, that coming home to self is whatever, again, even minute awareness I can have that those patterns are not me, and I can reconnect to the observer that's watching it all unfold and is recognizing my own sort of infinite connection to the universe.
Beautifully said. Yeah, it's that self with a capital S, right? If like more people
Yeah,
understood even what that is and connected to that more often, it would be so much easier to move through this life, because there's so many parts that come up that we identify with that cause us so much pain, but it's not really who we are. And so
that's it. Yeah,
listening but not identifying, I think, is huge. And so I love how
yeah.
you put that. How
That's
can people
totally it. Have you had, just one quick question, have
go
you
ahead?
had someone talk about the Enneagram on your show?
No, that which is so interesting because I've recently been getting into it so much. I'm a six, and
With your
I
fear, that
yeah,
makes some sense.
yep,
Yeah.
yep, yeah, the
Yeah.
feeling of like helplessness too, and just like perfectionism, and so much like feeling of a uh like security and support being like the core fear that I like fear losing and not
Yes.
having.
Yes.
Yeah, it's wild how accurate it has been for me to explore.
Yeah.
Is this something that you like love talking about? Because I'm like, let's do
Love it
another
so much.
episode someday.
Totally. When
Oh,
you're
that would
ready,
be
get me
so
back on
cool.
here. I could talk about the Enneagram for days. I'm so passionate
Oh,
about
that
it
would be so
because of what we're
cool.
talking about. It really is that understanding of capital S self versus all these patterns that we get so trapped in and we get so fooled by. And it's
Hmm.
this beautiful tool to reconnect with that capital S self.
Yeah, it's so, so helpful just to see
Yeah.
like what your parts are that make a lot of sense when you look at them. You're like, oh my gosh, like, yeah. But recognizing that that's not really who I am, and how can I integrate that back to like just have them be there, but not, yeah, not identify with them. I think it's so freeing. It
It
feels
really
so.
is. And, I'll save most of this for our next episode, but I'll say that it also helps you have more compassion for your relationships. You can look at the people around you and recognize when they're in their pattern and recognize that who they are is not that pattern. They have their capital S self too, that is
Mm.
all love and light. And we get in these twisted dynamics where we are patterns interacting with patterns. And the Enneagram is a really great way to move past that.
Wow. I'm so excited. All right. We will definitely bring this onto the show another time, and go deeper into that. I feel like that's a conversation that will be also really helpful for people. So, yeah, I'm so excited. Thank you so much. How can people connect with you if they're interested in learning more and being in your world?
Yeah, thanks for that. My website, my social media handles are Courtney Moore Wellness. Moore is my last name with two O's. So check out my website, check out my Instagram, my Facebook. I have this clinic in San Francisco for folks who want hands-on work. I also do offer remote medicine readings, which is a combination of energy reading and tarot. And I have a 12-week program that I developed specifically around everything we talked about in the show. So we talk about energy and emotion, pain as a language, metaphors in the body. The first half of the course is all education around these topics and creating that safety that I talked about that's so important. And then the second half of the course is all tools to move and release that energy. So we do EFT, we do yoga, we do breath work, we do meditation, we do all the things that you and I have been talking about. And I think it's really nice to engage in that journey in the context, the container of community and structure.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do all of that on your own, and I encourage you to do it. But if the idea of community and structure feels appealing, I hope you'll check it out. It's called The Liberated Body, and you can read more on my website.
Is it a live program that you run certain times of the year, or is it more like an evergreen?
It's evergreen and it's recordings, but everyone who does it does 3 one-on-one readings with me. And then we
Mm.
have a WhatsApp group that I try to keep pretty active so that people can check in throughout their weeks and just see how all the tools are settling in.
I love that. What a great place for people to go who are interested in diving deeper. I'll make sure
Yeah.
to link all of that in the show notes below. And other than that, thank you so much. This has been such a beautiful conversation, and I'm excited to have you back on soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was really wonderful.
All right, everybody. See you next week.